Well, if you have your Bibles, I know Sunday night I said something about looking at the Pharisees and talking more about the commandment to honor thy father and thy mother. And it's actually something I actually taught a little bit about a previous week, talking about another commandment. And so I'd actually, this week during my quiet time, I was on the fruit of the Spirit, and I learned something, and I decided, you know what, Lord, I feel like I'd rather share that, and I feel like that is what I need to talk about rather than the other thing, because really I've already talked about it. And so we're going to be in the book of Galatians tonight, Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 through 23, that is the fruit of the Spirit. We might read the verses before that to provide some more context. But I was doing a Bible study this week on my own time, and something that the person who Bible study I was using, something that person pointed out just sent my mind just like thinking about this and digging deeper into thinking about the fruit of the Spirit in this manner. And something that I might have thought about, but not this deeply before. And so that's why I felt led to share that, because mainly it got me excited. So I said, Lord, I feel like that's what I need to share. So we're going to read, let's start in verse 16 in Galatians chapter 5. Those are the verses preceding the fruit of the Spirit. And then, of course, we'll read on through the fruit of the Spirit and talk about it a little bit. So starting in verse 16, it says, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I've warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. And let us not become conceited, provoking one another and envying one another." Now, another reason why I thought it right to talk about the fruit of the Spirit is, well, we got, 2 days, and we have Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day is a holiday that's about love, right? And what's the first fruit of the Spirit that we learn about? It's love. And so I wanted to talk about the fruit of the Spirit, like I said, because it was in a Bible study I had done previously in this week, and it sent my mind just thinking. But to provide some context before we get into the fruit of the Spirit, let's go back and look at those preceding verses. Paul is teaching the Galatians, and he says to them, "But I say to you, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." That's a constant war that we all have within ourselves. We have our sinful self as a Christian, and then we have the Spirit of God inside of us. And the reason why I say as a Christian is because a non-believer doesn't have the Spirit of God residing in them. That's what happens when you trust and believe in Jesus. When you trust and believe in Jesus, you are saved, and in that moment, the Holy Spirit comes to live and reside in you. And after that point, there's a conflict that happens inside of us. And it is, we either give into the flesh, which represents our sinful nature, or we give into the Spirit, and we follow the Spirit. And So this is what Paul says. Paul says, for the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. So there's this war going on inside of us, a tug of war, back and forth. And it says, for these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. So as a Christian, you even have this, you have this pull back and forth inside of you, and sometimes you desire to do good, but you still find yourself giving into your flesh. And he says, what are you to do? What are you to do? You're to be led by the Spirit. And Paul even says later on, you gotta get in step with the Spirit. But he says that there are fruit first of the flesh. He says the works of the flesh are evident. So they're obvious. And the things that are obvious are things like sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envies, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. Now, some of these things that are named in here are things maybe you're not even tempted by. But there's other things in here like strife, jealousy, envy, fits of anger, rivalries. Those are things that we all struggle with, right? Now, like I say, other things on here, they're not necessarily things that we would even have on our radar. But we still stand guilty because things like enmity, strife, jealousy, envy, fits of anger, those are things we all still fall into. And this happens because of this tug of war, and we're either giving into the flesh or we're giving into the Spirit. And so what does Paul say? Paul says that we should get in line with the Spirit. And if you get in line with the Spirit, then what are we going to see in our life? What's going to be the product of that? Well, he says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. So Paul says, rather than those fleshly things, the products of the flesh, there should be the products of the Spirit in our life. And so a lot of times that's how we think of the fruit. We think of it as the obvious signs of an abiding relationship with Christ, right? That's how we think of it, that we should see these things, we should see our life produce these things. But here's where my devotion this week got my mind racing. And he says, why does the Apostle Paul use the analogy of fruit? See, because before he said of the flesh, he said the works of the flesh are evident, right? Now, he doesn't say the works of the Spirit. He doesn't, kind of do a parallel comparison and say, well, these are the works of the flesh, this is the works of the Spirit. Instead of saying works, what does he say? He says it's fruit. And he says, why does he use the word fruit here rather than saying works or like the evidence of the Spirit in somebody's life? Well, that's where he started talking, and he said, what if we thought about these things like growing fruit? And if they're fruit, then that means that they have to be nurtured. They have to be cared for. There has to be the nutrients there to let these things grow. And if that's the case, then what are the nutrients that cause these plants to blossom and grow and to mature into fruit? And it's like, okay. Because let's think about this, Christian. When you trust in Jesus, do you automatically start loving everybody? Do you automatically start having joy? All right? Do you just feel like you're walking around in peace all the time? Are you always patient with everybody? I'm a school teacher. No, I'm not patient with everybody. I get tested on that by the hour. All right? How about kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness? And then this last one, self-control. See, if these were just the evidence of a life with Christ, then they should just be popping up. You know, I'm walking with Christ. They should just be, popping up. But let me ask you this question. Have you ever grown a fruit tree? Have you ever grown a grapevine? Have you ever grown a fig bush? Well, let me tell you something. Fruit just doesn't appear. In fact, when you plant a fruit tree or bush or a grapevine of any sort, you're not really planting it for yourself. Most of the time, you're planting it for future generations. If you're lucky, you plant a variety that maybe will produce fruit in 7 to 8, maybe 10 years. That's a long time. That's a lot of investment. You have to nurture that thing and care for it, and then later you see the rewards of that investment. But it's something that has to be nurtured. It's something that has to be cared for. The right nutrients and minerals have to be in the ground in order to feed this thing for years before you see the fruit. And when you think about it that way, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Sometimes before we start loving like Christ, sometimes before we see the joy and the peace of Christ overflowing in our lives, sometimes it takes years of walking with Christ, right? And that's the thing is it takes that time, it takes that nurturing, and it takes a life of continuing to go to Him each and every day to see the fruit in our lives, these fruit to bear. So the fruit of the Spirit is something that comes by nurturing, comes by feeding the plant that bears the fruit. And that plant is your life and your relationship with Jesus. So what are the minerals that we need in our life and relationship with Jesus? It's prayer. Like that fruit plant needs water, sunlight, nitrogen, phosphorus, it needs other trace minerals in order for it to bear fruit. Your life likewise needs prayer, it needs Bible study, it needs worship, it needs relationship with other Christians, it needs accountability partners, it needs discipleship. Those are the things that your life needs in order to grow and to be nurtured and mature. And through a life of that, you begin to see the fruit of it. It doesn't just happen overnight. Here's the other thing. Fruit production can't be replaced by artificial means. It's just not the same. You might have something that looks like an apple, but if you bite into it, is it an apple? Does it taste like an apple? An artificial fruit. I think of growing up, my grandmother always had a bowl on her centerpiece of her dinner table, and it always had fake fruit. And I would always pretend I'd pick one up and act like I was going to bite it or something. And she always had it there. It looks pretty. And the thing about that bowl, it sat there for years, and it never rotted. It was just as pretty 10 years later as it was the day she first put it out there. It never spoiled. But was it real? Nope. It was fake. It didn't provide anybody with nutrients. It didn't provide anybody with vitamins. It just looked pretty. And to me, that's a good analogy, is sometimes we attempt to look good on the outside, but it might be empty on the inside. It might not have that life-giving growth on the inside. And sometimes maybe the reason why we put that out is we are afraid that, well, if somebody really saw who I am, they might see that one spot on me, that one blemish. Because that's the thing about fruit. Do y'all know how much fruit is thrown away every year because it has one little spot on it? Massive amounts of fruit never make it to the grocery store because it just doesn't look pretty. Does it have the same nutrient qualities? Yep. Does it have the same vitamins? Yep. But it doesn't make it to the shelf because it just doesn't look pretty. How many times are we afraid to allow people to see who we truly are because of that one little blemish. But made that one blemish, Jesus has, over time, made better and made better and made better. And maybe that one blemish may be the witness the world needs to see, because that's the evidence of Christ at work in your life. You understand what I'm saying, church? Maybe that's the area where He was taking you from this one dark spot into something better, but you were afraid to show the blemish because you didn't want people to see that. But over time, Jesus has transformed that part of your life into something beautiful. But you still compare yourself to something else. Artificial replacements are nothing compared to real fruit. And then the last thing that I wanted to say is the point and the purpose of fruit is not to be enjoyed by yourself. See, think about this. If the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, is this fruit meant for the tree that bears it? Does the fruit that fall off an apple tree, is it meant to feed the trees? Or is it meant to feed people who walk past it? And that's the point of the fruit that we bear in our life. The fruit we bear, that love, is not meant for us. It's meant for the people that walk past us. That joy is not meant for us, it's meant for the people that walk past us. That kindness, gentleness, even patience and self-control is not meant for us. It's meant for the ones that walk by us in our life. Are we growing fruit? Are we growing fruit in our life? Are we investing in the fruit of our life? Are we seeking Christ on a daily basis? Are we going to Him in prayer? Are we going to Him in Bible study? Do we come to Him weekly for worship, to sing His praises? Do we encourage one another to grow in these areas? Do we seek out somebody to help us grow? You know, because that's the thing. If you're a plant farmer, if you're growing, or if you're running a nursery, all right, and you have a disease that comes in and affects your plants, do you just sit there and watch it all rot? Or do you go find the man who knows a little thing about it? A man who's been there before, who's seen this before, and he knows how to deal with it. The same is true in our lives, in our walk with Christ. If there is issues that's preventing this fruit from bearing in our life, then we need to go find somebody who's dealt with it before. And we need to seek help. And we need to seek encouragement. So that's what has been on my mind the last couple of days of this week, is just thinking of the fruit of the Spirit as fruit and how it relates to fruit. It doesn't just happen. It takes investment. It takes time. It takes nurturing. It also can't be replaced with something that's fake. And it's not meant for us. It's meant for others that walk past us. So let's bear fruit, the fruit of the Spirit, starting with love. And what a wonderful opportunity to share that love this week as we celebrate Valentine's Day. And again, it's not just about sharing love with our spouse and our loved ones, but it's also about sharing love with those who walk past us. Maybe there's somebody in need of love, and maybe we have the chance to share it with them. But are we prepared to? Do we have that fruit evident in our life? Is it there ready to be picked off? Or is it rotten? Any thoughts, any comments, any questions as we come to a close? Yes.